You're listening to Indications by the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is John Metzelaar, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Indications, a series which helps senior executives address challenges and stay informed about current issues ahead of market trends. This series is brought to you by the Conference Board. Today I'll be sitting down with Anne Greer, Janet Howe, and Rita Shore, all leaders of the Conference Board, to discuss how to deliver better return on innovation through improved communication with stakeholders. So let's get into the subject matter. How do we connect innovation with communication? That's not a typical connection that's being made in business. We believe, however, we've learned it's fundamental. We were guided to this research by our advisory board, the advisory board of the Innovation and Digital Transformation Institute. It's a great group of people, of the senior leaders of Salesforce, the Microsofts, the 3Ms, the P&Gs of this world, Texas Instruments. And they identified that communication is under-leveraged, is undervalued, and they felt there was a need for us to prioritize research in this field. We did, and so we weren't sure what to find, to be honest. But one of the quotes from one of the first interviewees, which was a senior vice president and chief innovation officer of a large U.S. software company, gave us the reassurance that, hey, we're onto something. He said, "When I took the innovation job, I thought the key was to do great work hard, deliver innovation. I quickly realized, however, that communication was most important." Why is it so important? It helps in managing 4 key stakeholder groups: talent, customers, external partners, and as well as the media world. So they gave us a lot of encouragement. Now, Janet, you have been the closest to the research. You've been doing many of the interviews. You've been doing the subscription of the interviews, listened to them multiple times. Can you say a few words about the specifics of the research?
Well, this research is based on 17 interviews with people from 10 companies, both in the US and Europe. And people we interviewed have a diverse background, ranging from CEOs to chief innovation officers to chief technology officers and strategy officers and communication leaders. And they all pointed to the importance of communication for innovation. Our research is so unique it's unique because there is not much existing research on this. And when we talk with our interviewees, even if they have been in this field for decades, they are still asking us that, are we doing the right things? If you hear something different from other interviewees, please let us know. We want to make sure we didn't miss anything.
Thank you, Janet. And so let me go and get into the specifics of the findings. And I always say, fall in love with the problem before you jump to solutions. And so let's go and look at, why is communication so uniquely and critically important for innovation, particularly? Well, because innovation carries 4 main challenges that are unique to the innovation game versus anything else that's being done in business. It's incredibly complex. Innovation is multifaceted. It covers all the silos of an organization. It should involve and engage all the silos of an organization. Not only that, it's also uncertain, unpredictable. You have this vision of the future, but it's intangible. And on top of that, if that's not hard enough, it takes a long time for innovation to get done. I mean, some people, for instance, say, well, Uber jumped out and became successful in just a few years. They've been playing around with the concept for 10 years. So lead times are typically very long, can be longer than 10 years. And so how do you keep the continuity when those times are so long? And how do you keep, frankly, people in the company interested? And then on top of that, it also involves both technology and business areas. And you, of course, know how difficult it is to have communication going on effectively between those that are versed in technology and those that are versed in business. So complexity is number 1. Intangibility, I was already alluding to it. It's conceptual, it's something in the future, and it goes beyond business as usual. It's actually something that should bring together all the elements of business and develop something that doesn't exist yet and will hopefully do so in the future. All science has started as science fiction, and that adds a lot of challenge, a lot of skepticism across many people in a company when they see, an organization, part of the organization working on something that looks sci-fi, not maybe appreciating that it could be the biggest thing for the company and keep the company afloat 10 years down the line, or maybe even earlier. Third, it's dynamic. We all see big opportunities when we start the innovation game, but then some of the headwinds come in and they require us to change and pivot. And how do you, in that zigzagging, in that meandering path, How do you go and maintain the confidence and the trust across the organization with the leadership group, and even sometimes with your external partners? And if that's not enough, who has been given any training? Who's gotten any training in communication? We are trained as scientists or engineers or business leaders. Has anybody had a communication training ever in their education? If you had a business memo writing training, then you probably were lucky. So it lacks profoundly. People lack profoundly in experience in knowing how to communicate. With that grounding of the problem, let me share the 4 core insights that we extracted from the 17 interviews that Jenna was alluding to earlier on. So, what are the benefits of communication when it comes to innovation, and how do you get more out of your innovation? Hard work, because it brings multiple purposes together. Innovation requires investment, and so communication can help you go there. And get it. It helps to build and secure and maintain, I should say, the confidence in that sometimes long and meandering process that represents innovation. It can get you support from your CEO, support from your lead team, from your C-suite partners, but also support from your multifunctional partners, even if you're lower in the organization, and maybe even external support. You need sometimes suppliers to work with you, or other partners that you need to influence, and that's the 4th point there. Communication is absolutely critical to influence, and this is a challenge where many innovation leaders would go and scratch their head and go, I want to do innovation, I know it's right, but my CFO just doesn't want to fund it. How do you influence those skeptical individuals? Attract talent and clarifying things that are, as I mentioned, intangible. Bringing multiple purposes together is number 1. Number 2, and this is getting again to the dynamic nature of innovation. It eases the uncertainty in the long and challenging process. It drives alignment and maintains alignment. It also can show how the innovation activity actually flow from the purpose that the company is all about, and how do you live that purpose in the years ahead beyond the current business. It builds appreciation. It engages the organization in a broader sense, functional, all individuals, different levels. And then it helps to make the intangible. It should help to make the intangible tangible. Orchestrating the team support ensures the support and the continuity of the multifunctional team. Innovation is a multifunctional team sport. How do you keep everyone together? How do you keep your C-suite partners engaged? And if you think that's already challenging enough, today the norm on innovation is to do it in ecosystems. Well, that adds a bigger dimension on the challenge of alignment with your external partners in the ecosystem. And then, of course, multifunctional teams. Google has done the Aristotle research. I think it was called Aristotle, where they identified that the appropriate communication, the appropriate voice time of each of the members was a critical factor for the success of the teams. So there was a nice illustration of the core concept of the value of innovation, the value of communication in innovation. And then last is ensures consistency across audiences, and that is across both internal and external. It's employees internally, but also your customers, your shareholders, your investors, your analysts. Communication is critical to go and keep that all together. And what we've learned is that communication is most effective when it's congruent. It's congruent to the outside as well as to the inside. But you need to tailor it at the same time. It's not the same. It's congruent, but not the same. And by the way, it needs to be 2 ways. It often needs to start at listening, seeking first to understand, as Stephen Covey already said in his 7 Habits, before you're understood. So that's the last point of the impact that communication can have on the results of your hard innovation efforts, work, priorities, and even strategies. With that grounding, I want to move on to now 2 specifics. 1 is strategies and 2 is skills. And I'm going to refer to Rita and Anne to go and talk us through those. And Rita, I know you have an incredible passion for strategies. You lived through many of those. And so why don't you pick it up from here?
Right. As a technical person originally, I love the fact that we were able to group all the things that we heard into 5 approaches to get those impacts that John just talked about. And those 5 approaches, you can take 1 or more of these as you plan and design your innovation communication. And I'm going to name them. It's tying that innovation to your company's purpose or some big purpose. Another one is making sure management's thinking enough about the future. That's shifting some of their time there. And create a roadmap that holds all the complexity together more easily for people. Build a belief that innovation actually is doable, because for some people, they think it's like sci-fi, as John mentioned. And the other is make sure you are thinking of the part beyond the launch so that the adoption happens, so that you get the results and impact faster. So I'm going to talk about an example of each of those. So for tying the innovation to the company's purpose, this really is important because that helps the executives want to stay on for the ride, and it also helps build your not only business results, but your company's reputation. And basically, Salesforce is an example from one of our interviews. They have a goal to develop a strong relationship for their customers with their customer. And in order to do that, they actually measure the results for their customer. And that is huge. So whenever they talk about innovation, they name what those metrics are for the customer, and there's 4 of them. And then they help think about, okay, are we going to impact that? And they also have an internal method of accountability called V2MOM that you might want to check out. And they turn that and leverage that as part of making sure any commitments made going forward on the innovation are going to be visible and people will be accountable to that. I'm just going to remember that once in a project I had with 3M, that we actually didn't have a purpose that was really strong, but our research showed that we needed to go from infection control in an operating room to infection prevention in a much broader medical place. And then that helped influence the company's or that big business's strategy. So sometimes you're influencing the strategy if you don't already have the purpose. Number 2, shifting management thinking toward the future when they have so much to do in the present. That's tough. But doing that regularly, setting up meetings with other people to talk about the trends and the future can be done. And if you stick to it, you can make it a habit. FM Global has done that by gathering the innovation people with their change management, data analytics, and business transformation people regularly. And they help talk about avoiding duplication, but more importantly, how they can enhance each other's work. And they gain confidence by doing that. Becton Dickinson found the same thing, but they did it by getting a baseline of a really strong assessment of their innovation portfolio and having communication meetings regularly about that. Led to some new metrics that they thought would be more powerful, process improvements, and certainly confidence in the resource deployment. Third approach or strategy is have a roadmap that holds the complex innovation activities together. A roadmap can be as complex as what P&G did, with a desired customer experience that was used for multiple stakeholders, multiple programs, so that people could keep the consumers, business leaders, internal functions, all the technology experts checking together if they fit what that experience was. Sometimes it's as simple as 3 columns of activity and people keep reviewing them all the time, but it helped pull things together. The 4th strategy is, you know what, this really isn't science fiction. We've done this before, and we talk about it once in a while. One of our big software companies had 70 long-term people who kept referring back to what's already been done and achieved, and business benefiting from that. And lastly, be sure you keep that launch, post-launch in mind, and take that superior value proposition and make it happen all along the way. Use the learnings that team has right from the beginning. P&G uses it with their launch and leverage plan, which is well publicized, so go check it out. And Salesforce has recently established an Office of Chief Adoption Officer. And this is there with the team on a regular communication basis to make sure the stuff sells itself before it's even available. And now, there are some skills we learned besides these 5 approaches. Anne, would you like to continue with that?
Let me just go and reinforce one thing, Rita, before we jump straight into the skills, just to internalize some of this and maybe have a 2-minute conversation on this. One, if I hear you talk again, and I've heard you talk about this now several times, obviously, is that it does dawn on me that how critical it is to keep the whole company together, and to keep, you mentioned the point around FM Global, right? They bring short-term people with longer-term people, and that's how you create one culture that, of course, you need to perform on your current needs, but also how do you together transform the organization into the future. It's that ambidexterity that the current world requires from us, and so that's one angle. And the other angle that I internalize here is how important it is to go and make sure that you extract value from your innovation. I'm sensing from multiple sources that innovation, the name even innovation, is losing some of its luster because it's a lot of activities, a lot of posters, a lot of hackathons, it's a lot of table tennis tables. I don't know, that's not a word. Yeah, table tennis tables. Yeah, to go and have some fun. But where's the money? Where is the value that you deliver, that you create and capture in the end? So that's where communication can really help to deliver on that challenge.
Well said.
With that, Anne, you want to go and unveil the 7 communication skills to us?
Sure. We've covered the strategies and the power of adding a stronger communications plan to innovation. And I'm going to cover the practices and techniques that bring these strategies to life. There's 7 of them, and the first 4 are, first of all, listening before outward communication. The second is speaking not only to the minds, but also the hearts of people. And often this is best done through the power of storytelling. The third is adopting a rallying cry. We've heard this from many of the interviewees. And finally, for this session, the sweating of the details. I'm going to illustrate this through a story. The story I'm going to tell happened about 40 years ago during the inception, development, and launch of Post-it notes. Without strong communication, Post-it brand would never have become the familiar name it is today. In fact, it never may have been launched. The inventor of the product, Art Fry, was instrumental in helping get Post-it off the ground. 3M was really lucky because Art and the leader of the business that launched Post-it were natural communicators. You may have already heard the story of Art's invention, where he developed the sticky back note to solve a problem that he and his fellow choir church members faced, and that is that they had put paper slips in to mark the hymns that the choir was going to sing during the service, but they kept coming loose and floating to the ground, causing distraction and dismay. Art thought that he could maybe solve the problem because he was aware of a new 3M adhesive that was sticky, but not too sticky. So he went back to his lab. And after multiple experiments and failures, he created a reliable bookmark for his choir. The invention soon found other uses within 3M laboratories and offices. And eventually, it grew into the first idea for commercial use. That is a pink bookmark named Press and Peel, which was designed for the library market. The story you may not have heard was how the leader of Art's business, Joe Ramsey, expanded the thinking beyond the bookmark, won over internal and external naysayers through his ongoing communication with them, and put everything on track for a highly successful launch. Under Joe, Press and Peel evolved into wider uses, became yellow, and was rebranded Post-it notes. The notes were tested in 4 cities in a test market, and they failed miserably in 2 of them. So Joe hit the road to talk to the dealers who were involved in the tests. He wanted to ask questions, to learn, to listen. He came back with a huge insight that made all the difference. He discovered that where the product had succeeded, the dealers had used all their promotional allowances to sample the product to potential customers. They realized that the product was so unusual at the time that people didn't believe it would work until they tried it for themselves. Joe and his team also used two rallying cries. One was Boise Blitz, which referred to the final test market in Boise, Idaho. The other was really more of a claim, which was that Post-it notes would surpass the sale of 3M's Scotch brand transparent tape within 2 years. This was an amazing claim. And the claim really resonated with dealers because the tape was one of their top selling products. It also resonated strongly with reporters and editors. This aspirational claim became a battle cry that encouraged the Post it note to think big despite the challenges of manufacturability, scaling, inventory build, determining forecasts, preparing the external communications plan, and many other things. The communications team also really sweated the details. Everybody was given the time and the financial means to conduct all kinds of tests to check everything out. And finally, the sampling plan was checked, the advertising plan, the public relations plan, and finally, the Boise Blitz gave everyone the feedback they needed to further adjust for the national launch. So, with this, you'll see that sweating the details, rallying cries, listening first, and as well as the leader's ability to engage the hearts and minds all contributed to a highly successful launch and a start to this well known brand. Let's turn to the other three very important techniques that we discovered. The first is articulating the product problem you're trying to solve. And this is getting very, very clear and having an in depth understanding of what problem you are trying to solve with your innovation. This is really important at the early stages to get clear on what it is you are intending to do. And a great illustration of this was during a conversation with Texas Instruments, where we learned that the innovators go and they talk to customers, oftentimes the customer. It's a very iterative process where they really get down to what it is that will make a difference, that will be differentiating and important to the customer. And that becomes a North Star for the team as they develop. It's also very important at launch to be really clear and to communicate with potential customers what it is the product will deliver. So the item number 6 that we found was to translate technical language into layman's language. Imagine if the repositionable note called Post-it was instead called the pressure sensitive microsphere adhesive that was coated on a paper substrate. Would customers have understood that? Would they have resonated? It made everybody internally in the labs happy, and we understood what it meant. But it is not customers' language. Very important to translate. A company that does that extremely well is Salesforce, and they actually are very disciplined in having 3 different levels of technical aspect, if you will, so that they can communicate to their key audiences. One level is focused on technical detail because there are technical decision makers. They need to understand what the technology is. But the other 2 are really more focused on what the technology will deliver as opposed to the specs of the technology. The 7th item that kept on popping up was the use and value of professional communicators. And they can, in fact, help with all the other items here on this list of top techniques. The complexity of communication is growing. The noise, the attention that you need to have towards it is growing. A professional communicator adds acumen, structure, skills that are required for effective communication with both internal and external audiences. When we talked to a Becton Dickinson company innovation executive, they had hired a communications professional to work with the team and found many benefits. But prime among them was the person's ability to really simplify messages for a broader audience, and then also coming up with the right balance of making people aware, communicating so that you are heard, but without bombarding people with messages. So those are 7 techniques that really bring the strategies to life and help address some of the challenges that innovators seek on the way to favorable outcomes. So back to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. That's brilliant. And it's so nice that you finish off our presentation, our conversation here with skills, because it's getting us towards actionability, and that's really what the conference board is all about: bringing you actionable, tangible handles that you can apply to your business. And I'm sure, I hope, no, I hope, and I'm sure you'll have identified at least one or two in this from this conversation. So we touched on the 4 key challenges, 4 core insights on why is it so important uniquely with innovation to make sure you drive communication. We looked at 5 communication strategies, and we went through 7 communication skills. I want to close this podcast because it is time with 30 seconds. What is the one thought that you want leaders to go away with tomorrow to start with their business and leverage communication better for better results? Each of you. Janet.
My call for action item is that to realize you are an innovator too. Even if you do not have a title of innovation leader, partly because of the pandemic, we're actually doing many things new. You may be starting a new program, starting a new process, or developing a new product. And you may run into problems such as your coworkers do not understand what you're doing. And when you have successful outcomes, how you are going to describe your achievement. These problems are related to the nature of innovation. So I would encourage you to really think of yourself as an innovator without a title of an innovation leader, and read our report and 2 toolkits so you can find ways to avoid those problems and solve those problems. Thank you.
In today's VUCA on steroids world, the only constant is change. We're all innovators. So embrace that, be proud of it, and leverage it, and use communication to your benefit. Anne.
Yeah, to jump right in, improving the communication on innovation is one of the lowest cost, lowest risk, and fastest things you can do to improve innovation outcomes. So take some of the ideas and get started.
And so untapped, right? Please, Rita.
Yes, and I'd just like to say, in order to do what Anne said, give your team members the honor of having at least one sort of coaching or training that they get to learn, so that when they work with the professional, they are feeling more empowered. And quite honestly, it helps them plan every communication they do better from now on. If you give them some kind of coaching, even if that coaching gives some criticism, they're getting the honor of becoming better.
That's so important. Give people training, and on top, make it a habit. Live it. Innovation is such hard work. It's so difficult to do, and communication is an absolute top spin to drive results from your innovation. Miss it at your own peril is what I would say. Thank you all for listening to the podcast, and thank you in particular, of course, our team, Janet, Rita, and Anne, for doing the work on the report and communicating it so clearly. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our Indications podcast series, or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. Thank you all very much. Look forward to any comments. Bye.
This has been Indications from the Conference Board.